A friend of mine asked me my opinion about the Fauci hearings up in D.C. in the House of Representatives. As you might think, I have a couple of thoughts about it. So let's discuss. Hey everybody, it's Dr. David. So, as many of you know, I'm a pediatrician here in Tampa, Florida. Holistic pediatrics and family care is my practice. And as somebody who is an independent thinker who does not toe a party line about things, especially when it comes to healthcare, I try to obtain the truth. I try to take as much information as I have at the time when a decision needs to be made. I am somebody who firmly believes in vaccine choice as well as choice when it comes to all things related to healthcare and personal autonomy. Now, as you probably know, up in DC this week, there were hearings that were done with Anthony Fauci. And, from what I could tell, this was not much more than a political theatrics. Now, of course, as many of you know, because he was Donald Trump's advisor when it came to COVID, that was put on by Donald Trump, who I know only hires the best of the best when he brings people into his staff, as he's shown and as he's talked about that he'll only hire them. But as far as this, Dr. Fauci is somebody who dedicated his entire career to public health. Okay. He was director of the National Institute of Allergies and Infectious Diseases for almost 20 years. He oversaw extensive research when it came to HIV, tuberculosis, malaria, diseases that most of us never have thought about for ourselves or our family, but he was somebody on the world level trying to figure these things out. Okay. He was advisor to actually 7 different presidents, both Democrat as well as Republican. So, he has worked under all kinds of administrations. And I realize it's just up until now, or the past administration, I should say, where suddenly people start having a problem with him. And I'm guessing it's because they didn't agree with his opinions. Okay, we're all entitled to that. I'm totally respectful of everybody else's opinions. Now, of course, he also became really well known during the COVID pandemic. Now, um, as far as what I think regarding these hearings, you know, so much of these types of hearings that we see up in DC, it's grandstanding. It's to get clicks. It's for the social media crowd to see who can be the most I don't know if you use it obnoxious, but the most loud, to make the most radical types of points in order to get more clicks. And it's not necessarily something that really do I see much of helping America, helping our population. Okay. Now, one of the, pardon me, one of the elected officials, one of the House members, actually said that Dr. Fauci is responsible for killing millions of people. She even refused to call him doctor. I'm sorry, but that is just rude and disrespectful. You don't get the right to decide whether somebody gets called doctor or not. We go to medical school, we do residency, we take our boards, we do our board examinations, our medical licensing, we keep up with it, we keep up with CMEs. Nobody has a right to tell me that I am or am not a doctor, just like I don't believe people have a right to do that with Dr. Fauci. You don't have to listen to him, you don't have to believe him, but come on. That, would I still refer to Donald Trump as, was I referred to him as President Trump? Of course I did, because he was president of our country. Didn't mean that I agreed with a lot of what he was saying, but out of respect for the office, he was still President Trump, right? He's former President Trump now. Okay. Just like I hear people who refuse to call Biden president. This is ridiculous. People earn their degrees, people earn their places, and it's totally disrespectful to not acknowledge that. Okay, yeah, there was another representative who actually said that he is responsible for crimes against humanity, which I don't know if that's a real thing, and I know there's cards against humanity, but I think that's something different. But again, this is just grandstanding. I'm sure a lot of people watched. I'm sure that his followers online were thrilled to hear these types of things. But again, how does that help our national discourse? How does that help move the ball forward in trying to figure out what happened with COVID and how to prevent future viruses, future pandemics from causing as much of an impact as it did? That's what we should be focusing on. Yes, it's important for us to know how it happened. It's important for us to know, did this change from animal to human? Was there a lab leak that happened? Was it accidental or was it on purpose? And I'll have some more thoughts about that. But it's just we, as President Obama once said, we can disagree without being disagreeable. It's something how I live my life. I think we need to have honest discussions about things and how things happen. But to go ahead and make those type of comments again, to me, that's beyond the pale. Now, I have to say, as a physician, I respect Dr. Fauci. I respect what he's done for all of these decades in trying to help our population, to help the world out. Okay. Do I think he had some diabolical plan that he was sitting there saying, "Hey, how can I create this virus that would that and sick it on the world so that millions of people could die?" Come on. That's ridiculous. Now, do laboratories do gain of function research? Yeah, that's something I would expect a virologist to do, because in order to come up with ways of solving things, you have to kind of look to see what can happen. Okay, so gain of function research is something that is done by virologists all over the world. Okay, does that mean it's done in a nefarious way? No. Does it mean that it's something that was leaked out on purpose in order to get people sick? No. Does it mean that that didn't happen in this case? Again, in terms of what actually happened, I don't know the answer to that. Do I still think that there's a plausibility of the moving of the virus from a bat population to humans? Sure. Look at what we're seeing right now in terms of the bird flu, which then passed into cows, as we've seen with the milk and other areas, and who are now being seen in cases in humans, especially those who are farm workers, agricultural workers. It happens. It moves from one species to another. Okay, hopefully we won't see that, but would I be surprised if we see a novel pandemic happen from bird flu? I hope not. It's actually more dangerous, from what I can tell, than COVID is. So hopefully that won't be the case. Do I think that that researchers and now are focusing on a vaccine? Fortunately, it'll be a regular flu shot. It sounds like that would just transfer over with this H5N1. Remember, they had to come up with a special one for H1N1 swine flu when that happened. What was that, about 15 years ago or so? So, no, I guess about 10 years ago. So, yeah, it happens. And we would want our scientists to be thinking a few steps ahead. That's something that I do every day in my clinic. I'm always trying to think a few steps ahead of where I am so that I can better figure out a person's issues as opposed to going at it blind. That to me is smart. That's logical. That's intuitive. That's what doctors are supposed to do. Now, as far as there's a couple other things that I do have a lot of other thoughts of this, but of course it is that I believe in science. Seems as if for a while we had anti-science protests going on out there for a while, and science is science. Research is research. There's no such thing as a perfect research, and we don't know everything at the start of things. That's why we do research, in order to learn. So, of course, things change. That doesn't mean that somebody was lying, as he was accused, that Dr. Fauci was accused of doing here. We give our best advice at the time. Okay, what did things that we learned? We learned originally we were told don't use masks, save it for the medical providers, and for some reason, some people took it to say, really, they thought we didn't need masks overall, and then they put it on us. No, that's not right. People started using also bad masks. People were making their own at home. Remember, people were putting gaiters on. Surgical masks. Eventually found out that the N95, KN95 were the best forms. Do I think masks made a difference? Yes, I do. Anything that inhibits an aerosol being released into the air because some of it's caught by the fibers of a mask, the better. The better the mask, the better. Do I think it solved the world's problems? No, absolutely not. Do I think people got infected with the virus even though they wore a mask? Absolutely. Were they wearing the mask right? Was it a good mask? That's obviously a different question altogether. Now, but we learned about a lot of other things. What did we learn? At first, we were told, because we didn't know how this was spreading, wipe down your packages. Okay, we learned over time that wasn't necessary. We learned over time that because we were told that it was really in droplets, okay? And no, in fact, we found it was aerosolized. Why was that a big deal? Because when the original recommendation of 6 feet of social distancing was happening, that was relative to thinking it was droplets. Once it was determined that it was aerosolized, those numbers really didn't make sense, even though I recognize for a long time people were still quoting it. Now, even I've heard Fauci, other people have come out and said, yeah, 6 feet doesn't make sense. That was based upon previous research relative to droplets. Do I blame him? No, we didn't know at the time what was going on. Now, other things, at first we were told everybody has to get the vaccine. It's the only way to save us. And I knew that wasn't true. I knew that by the time the vaccine came out, there were a lot of people who had the disease. Some people died. A lot of people died. Some people, it was mild. We knew with kids, it was almost nothing for most of them. Right? But of course, we didn't know that at first. So cautions were taken. Okay. Did we learn over time that herd immunity was actually much better? First, they talked about how having the disease plus a dose of the vaccine was superior to just having one or the other. Makes sense. More than one exposure primes the immune system, retrains the immune system to fight better. More than one dose of having 3 would have more exposures, and every time a person would typically get exposed, they'd be more likely to not have a severe disease when it came to COVID. Side effects, of course. We were told there were no side effects, right? We were told this is completely safe and completely effective. Now, first of all, anybody who says the words completely, they should never use those words. I never believe those, okay? But obviously, you couldn't say it was completely effective because there were people who were catching COVID. Now, were they getting sick less? Sure. Were they less likely to have severe disease, to have more aerosolized that would get people sick? Yes. But certainly, people were still getting sick, okay? Then what we learned? We learned that actual natural immunity worked better than vaccine immunity, and that it lasted longer and it was more complete because it wasn't just creating spike protein IgG. When the person gets the disease, we learned soon after that there were many different proteins on the COVID virus besides spike that would be sites that our immune system could potentially attack and have memory for. So we learned that over time. That's why policies changed. The reason why the pandemic formally came to an end is because we all had herd immunity. By then, 95% of people had COVID. So the disease just wasn't the same, and that's why we don't think of it. And now when they come up with these different, there's this new subvariant or whatever, I stop paying attention to that. Oh, we're going to have a new vaccine that's going to take care of that. But people aren't getting overly sick right now. So I don't personally see the point of all of that. Now, in terms of that also, but I do want to point out, COVID was a real thing. There are people who are COVID deniers out there, okay? There were about 1.2 million Americans who died from COVID, and about 6 million were globally. And I realized that at first, people were having COVID listed on some death certificates, etc., when it wasn't really to cause it. And we started talking about people who died from COVID as opposed to dying with COVID, right? And that differentiation got made, and that got changed in the way that pathologists, etc., were reporting things, okay? Of course, after time, we realized we're not going to track this anymore. And thankfully, we stopped doing that, and we kind of got back to our lives, okay? But our medical, our public health, political leaders, all of them were making the best decision at their time. Operation Warp Speed was something that Donald Trump put into place. It's probably one of the biggest policies that he made. He created funding to bring a vaccine to market that never would have happened that quickly if not. Do I think that overall it was a net positive? Yes. Do I think that there were problems along the way? Absolutely. But still, that was a big move because that's what I think got us to a point where people could go out and have herd immunity better from catching it from the wild disease. Now, once again, just so to reiterate, I am firmly one who believes in vaccine choice. I was not one who believed that we should be mandating any vaccines. I don't believe the government should have been doing it. I know that, that they were doing in the Army, that we lost service people who dropped out because they didn't want to get it. I know that there were people who were being forced in workplaces to get vaccines, even though they had COVID already and had proven immunity with antibodies. Because remember, we used to check antibodies and we could tell whether a person had the wild disease because there was a nucleocapsid antibody and not just the spike protein, which would show up from the vaccine or otherwise. So we could prove that a person had wild disease already. And still, people were being forced to get the vaccines. People were being ostracized for not getting the vaccine, which I had a lot of problems with that too. People have a right to make their own decisions. Okay. So overall, just as far as me, because I've always talked about how I did, once I had, I did take the first few boosters as a first line doctor, as somebody who doesn't have a spleen and was more at risk of severe disease, as somebody who has asthma. I wanted to make sure that I was protected from that early onslaught of the disease. Okay. Once I had the disease a couple times and I had the wild disease, I'm like, okay, I see how my body has this. Did I get additional boosters after that? No, there's been several since then. I've chosen not to do that. Doesn't mean that's what other people should do. That's what I've chosen to do. Okay. So, that's my take on all of this. I wish that people would stop grandstanding. I wish that we actually had scientific hearings. I wish that would have been the focus of this as opposed to just an attack type of thing, which is really, more of what this whole all these hearings mostly evolved into or devolved into. So that's my take. Have a nice day.